Okay, welcome everybody to this AI Insight series, moving from foundational knowledge to future competencies. We've spent a lot of time talking about AI literacy and how to use it and what tools are available. This is not going to be about that so much. Before we get too far into it, my name is Peg Checky, and I'm here with Dr. Emily Rush, who is our AI education specialist here at Citi. I am the gleeful Sherpa. And Emily, you want to talk about the upcoming events since you're the hostess with the mostess?
Sure. All right. Thanks for that intro. So just to keep in mind some events on the horizon, the first is the AI Learning Community will have its first in-person meeting on March 19th at 12 to 1 p.m. If you're not already a member of the learning community, feel free to send me an email and I'll make sure you're invited. On March 24th, we have a continuation of our AI Insight series with a discussion about clinical applications of generative AI with Dr. Justin Giebau. And then on April 8th, we will also continue our conversation about AI and academic research, in which, in this case, we'll be looking at AI agents and autonomous research or semi-autonomous. We'll see how that pans out with guest facilitators, Dr. Adam Wilson and Dr. Colleen Shavirko.
It sounds like an exciting month or two coming up for sure. And thank you to all those faculty members that are participating with us. Today, we're going to talk about moving from ensuring literacy to mastering competency, right? And there's a difference, and then there's a foundational difference between them. You can't move to one without having a solid foundation in the other. So we're going to define again critical AI literacy, how it works. We're going to talk about the factors that influence AI accuracy and some bias. We're going to talk about hallucinations a little bit. We're going to talk about constructing effective prompts. And we're going to apply an AI competency framework to guide professional development in not just in healthcare disciplines, but across the board, really. Do you guys have other things that you would like to or that you would hope to cover in this workshop? Please do put them in the chat and we will absolutely catch them as we go through.
Can I interject something quickly, Peg?
Please.
And that is, I want to preface that this is a foundational introduction to AI and AI literacy, but in some cases, I think we'll be raising more questions than answers. So we hope that you think of this as a dialogue and that you feel free to put questions in the chat or let us know what you're thinking or if there are additional questions you'd like to hear about.
Yeah, please do. This is the best workshops are the ones where we all talk about stuff, not where we just yap at you. First things first, AI is absolutely not new. As you guys all know, we've been using it for years. Robotics, predictive AI text, predictive AI for imaging and diagnosis and drug development and wearable tech. I mean, I'm wearing a Fitbit. I've had a Fitbit since they came out. Obviously, transcription and then of course your apps for training. That was my nod to the South there by not putting in my G. Actually, it was just a typo. I apologize for that. But certainly we've got a lot of apps that are developed, and they've even gamified some of those apps with AI, which is a lot of fun. We lean into the academic applications, but we also rely on the faculty and all of the professionals that we work with to provide us with those clinical applications. Because as we know, there's a marriage between the two, right? We don't have the subject matter expertise to be able to provide the clinical applications, but we want to make sure that we're always leading with the educational side, following up with the application side so that it resonates more with you. So just make sure you're reaching out to us if you ever have situations that you wish we would pay more attention to. So Emily's going to pick up with what is AI literacy? Take it away.
All right, thanks, Peg. So yeah, in setting the foundation for the workshop today, we want to talk first about what is AI literacy. It's a term that's thrown around quite a bit today. And so I want to start with the framework that we've been using predominantly at Citi. And here I'm turning to the foundational work of Long and McGarrick from 2022 about what is AI literacy. I recommend the article if you're interested in the topic. And so at heart, Long and McGarrick define AI literacy as a set of competencies that enables individuals to critically evaluate AI technologies, communicate and collaborate effectively with AI, and use AI as a tool online, at home, and in the workplace. All right. So this is as I said, a foundational definition, one that's pre-ChatGPT. So that's something we want to keep in mind. And we can go ahead to the next slide, Peg. That's fine.
Okay.
So while we rely heavily on definitions and conceptualization of AI literacy by a work like Long and McGarrick, We've also expanded our discussion of what is AI literacy into this question of what is critical AI literacy. And in AI and education studies, this is a question that's very relevant. It's highly discussed. And so in terms of thinking about what is critical AI literacy, we lean heavily on the work of Maha Bali, a scholar and faculty developer at AUC in Egypt. And she expands on Long and McGarrico's definition to say that AI literacy is not just knowing how to use AI, but as importantly, it's knowing when to use it and when not to use it. And that's something that's been foundational in all of the training that Citi has done and the AI literacy module, for which we have a not subtle promo in the lower right-hand side of the screen. So in terms of critical AI literacy, and this is the framework that will be guiding most of our discussion today, it means things like being critical in our thinking, being skeptical about the use of AI in terms of when it's appropriate, what it can do, and what its limitations, and questioning those aspects. It also brings in an aspect of critical pedagogy that focuses on topics of social justice and inequalities that might be created, exacerbated, or reproduced through the use of certain AI tools or systems. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. We'll actually see some examples. All right, next slide, please, Peg.
You bet.
All right, so here is just an expanded view of what are some key dimensions of AI literacy in terms of research and practice. Again, from Maha Bali, different article, but same author. And so for Bali, she breaks down key elements of AI literacy into the following. So first of all, understanding how AI works. We don't have to be machine learning experts, but I think it is important that we have a foundational understanding of how machine learning and neural networks work, how generative AI and large language models work, just so we understand why we get the outputs that we do. As part of that foundational knowledge, we can start to better understand or to recognize inequalities and biases and make decisions about how we might respond to content accordingly. An additional component, according to Maha Bali, is examining ethical uses of AI. And we will talk about that somewhat later on in this workshop, but the reality is, unfortunately, there are so many ethical issues involved in the use of AI that it could be a separate workshop into itself. And if there is interest in a specific workshop on AI ethics, let us know in the chat. And that's something we can plan for our summer lineup. All right, great. Okay, in terms of, oh, sorry, wasn't quite done.
Yep, sorry.
No problem. We're just so excited about this content that we just want to race through it. Okay, so other things that are key to AI literacy are crafting effective prompts. Our output is going to be only as good as the quality of prompt and the level of specificity of the prompt. So that's another component of AI literacy, and Peg will talk about that a little bit more shortly. And then we also want to talk or consider appropriate use. So when is it appropriate to use AI? And when may it not? When is it possible that it's just not appropriate to have certain AI uses? And I don't know if you're keeping an eye on the chat, Peg. I'm not really able to do that right now.
Yep, I have been responding.
Great. Okay.
So.
All right. And
Next.
I was just going to say, again, just a reminder, if you have questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves or put your question in the chat, but I think we can move on to the next slide if there are any questions. Okay, so I've introduced the foundations of what is AI literacy. So now I want to touch upon why do we need AI literacy in general. And first I want to do this by bringing to your attention a quote by Mark Watkins. And I'll just pause for a second and give you a moment to read the quote. Now, what strikes me about this quote and what I think is so relevant is Watkins highlights the fact that we suddenly have, since November 22, we have access to these new tools and powerful technologies, but we really have no rule book or training manual regarding how to use them effectively or ethically. So to me, this really underscores the need for AI literacy. But if we move to the next slide, please, Peg. I also want to talk about why we need AI literacy in a health education context. And so here I want to draw your attention to a figure from the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report. And there is a QR code for that report in the lower right hand of the screen. As an aside, I did have fun putting several QR codes throughout the presentation so you can follow along and track down some of the different resources that we reference. So in terms of in healthcare education context, I think this figure from the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report is relevant in that it highlights that 73% of healthcare organizations have indicated plans to boost human AI collaboration, but only 45% of the educational sector has made that same commitment. And so this underscores what Parker notes in this great quote, and just pardon me for reading it, but she says that this gap creates an interesting tension in which we're preparing students for a healthcare workplace that will be more AI collaborative than the educational environment they're currently learning in. And so for me, part of AI literacy is helping to navigate this tension and to think about how we can bring AI readiness into healthcare education. It doesn't necessarily mean AI adoption, but I think we want to think about AI readiness. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so now that we've had a little bit of a conversation about why AI literacy matters in general and why it might matter in a healthcare education setting, I want to think about what might AI literacy look like in the real world. And for me, AI literacy might manifest in two ways. So on the one hand, it might translate into having the foundational knowledge and skills to teach about AI and how it's used in your discipline or field. And of course, this is going to look different for everyone on this call. But on the left side, we see some different examples of questions that Citi has developed that may or may not be relevant to your field, but at least they're examples of the kinds of questions we might begin to tackle. So thinking about how does AI challenge traditional authorship? How do AI biases impact healthcare diagnoses and delivery? And questions about privacy and security. So what does AI mean in relevance to in relationship to patient data? Or how might we think about the sustainability of AI models that we're adopting individually or system-wide? So those are some questions that we might think about in terms of how AI and teaching about AI might permeate your work in your classes. And just to point out another QR code, if you use the QR code in the upper right, you can see some other questions that Citi has developed that might be relevant to your different disciplines or your courses. I think the other side of that, and this is something that Citi has probably talked a lot more about, is being able to teach with AI. We've done a lot of workshops in which we've discussed the use of different AI tools and systems, and we've talked a lot about the different ways they might enhance teaching, learning, and professional practice, doing things like we've had past workshops on AI and assessments, or how might we rethink discussion forums in the light of AI. So part of, I think, foundational AI knowledge and AI literacy is also thinking about potential applications of AI in your course setting. And this could mean things like using AI chatbots for personalized learning, things like AI tutors. I know some of you are interested in topics of AI as a research assistant, so how can AI enhance the research process? Other possibilities are things like how can AI support feedback and assessment? And that's something that we'll be exploring additionally this summer, I think, in terms of Citi workshops. And we've also had questions about how can AI be used for simulation or case-based learning? So for example, we can create custom chatbots that can simulate patient communication encounters or try to give students feedback on how they convey information to their patients. So those are just a few, I think, ways that we actually see AI literacy possibly translate into the classroom. All right. Any questions? This is a good stopping point before we move ahead.
Just to underscore what you were saying, there are even apps that are available through the App Store and the Google Play Store that will create live ER situations for students, for example. And it's basically personalized learning, right? Depending on what answer they choose, it'll take them down that path. And doing things like that really help engage students. They love to play those kinds of games.
Right, right. Tapping into student motivation and engagement, I think certainly can enhance learning. Adam, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the chatbots for personalized learning. So I guess when I think of this topic, I get the sense that maybe you've got an AI system whereby you input some preliminary information about the student, and then it uses that information to tailor certain learning, the learning environment or the questions, whatever the case may be. So I guess my question is, to what extent are we sort of ethically allowed to input some of that information about students, right, from a FERPA perspective? And what examples of systems are out there that really are personalized learning focused? Because I'm not convinced that personalized learning is what I want it to be. I feel like it could be better than what I'm seeing currently.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So what it sounds like you're describing to me is sounds more like intelligent tutoring systems, which is somewhat different from AI. And Adam, jump in if I'm wrong, it's fine. So I think intelligent tutoring systems that there is an AI aspect about it. Perhaps there may be more opportunity for customization, and you're right that there might be more back end knowledge about students' performance on individual and a range of tasks is how I see the difference. Whereas the custom chatbot that at least that we've had an opportunity to experiment with don't have that sort of granular knowledge about the students. And you're right, it would be highly problematic to create a chatbot unless we use Copilot. We can actually now create chatbots with Copilot at Rush, so there is that option. There are still FERPA considerations. I think what we can do is create more like adaptive learning activities or games.
So I think if I can summarize what you're saying, that the AI chatbots for personalized learning are more like what is known in education as computer adaptive testing, right?
Right.
Whereby you're using that approach in item response theory to actually elicit more questions to a student in a certain topic level or difficulty level so that you can hone in on their specific expertise and skill set in that particular area. Is that right?
I think that's correct. And the other thing that we can use custom chatbots for is, in addition to the adaptive component, that we can create more scenario-based learning. So this is something that City has done for the medical college in terms of a T-cell tutor bot, or as I have on the bottom of the slide, we can do sort of patient communication simulations that can draw on a set scenario or a custom knowledge base. But no, they don't have that specific data set about the student's performance on an individual task or over a range of tasks. That's a great question. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just see a lot of utility in this for student dashboards, for example, right? Like if AI was going to be kind of overseeing a dashboard for a cohort of students in a program, that could be really, really useful, but I don't think we're there yet.
No, I don't think we're there yet. I completely agree with you that when we get to the point that we have AI-driven learning analytics, that would be immensely valuable. But we're not there yet for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, but I think we're closer than we might recognize as we bring the medical college into Canvas, because the medical college is really keen on working with those kinds of with that kind of data to be able to drive performance, right? And so we have been talking about, and we don't want to derail the presentation, obviously, but we've been talking about implementing Canvas outcomes along with mastery paths. And if we did that, eventually, and it's not anything that's going to happen soon, so I don't want to send cascades of panic into anybody, but eventually what we could theoretically do is upload all of the competencies that you want students to achieve and then map tasks to those competencies within the courses. As they complete the competencies, they get a check mark or a a thumbs up or what a yellow or green dot, whatever, that says yes, they've achieved that competency, and then off they go. So what you're talking about, Adam, is not, and that's all housed within Canvas. It's a Canvas, it's a feature, not a bug. It actually is designed to do that. So it could be closer than we think. We just have to get people comfortable in the Canvas environment and really put our heads together to make it happen, because it's a huge project.
I love that, but that's what I was going to say, Peg, was that feels too big to encompass all the colleges. And then I get nervous
Yep.
that there's going to be some of people who want to be able to utilize that can't.
Yep.
Because there's
Well,
not
and
enough.
Exactly. We have a lot to work through before we can implement it.
All right, thanks for those great questions. Any other questions? Peg, I'm going to ask you not to proceed with the slides, though, just yet.
Yep, you got it.
Okay. All right. So maybe just to set us up for the next part of the workshop, I just want to ask for a virtual show of hands or put in the chat, how many of you have been introduced to the foundations of how AI works by looking at some sort of diagram? Oh, wow. No. Okay.
Well,
then.
already then.
Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, let's move ahead. And we're going to take a different approach to talking about the foundations of how AI works, especially generative AI. So, Peg, if you could go to the next slide, please.
I can. This is going to be fun, y'all.
It's definitely going to be fun. All right. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to use the QR code to access a game called Google Quick Draw. And using the QR code or navigating to Google Quick Draw, this is a very quick game, you will doodle 6 images. And as you're doing this, I'd like you to think about the questions listed on the screen. And we'll take a minute to talk about those. And when you're finished with your drawings, if you want to just unmute yourself or type done in the chat, just so we have a sense of when people have completed this activity.
I see river. I see a clarinet.
All right, for those of you who are playing, is anyone finishing up or have completed their round of quick draw?
Yeah, I didn't do very well.
I suck.
All right, Peg,
Oh,
you
I
want
got
to
one
go to the
right.
next slide? And you want to tell us a little bit, so did the AI recognize any of your drawings?
Oh, I think I did better than I thought. Oh, okay, I did better than I thought. 1, 2, 3. I got 4 right, and I got 2 wrong.
Okay.
Yoga wrong. How do you draw yoga? I drew a smiley face with a sunshine around it. I'm stumped. And a French fry. It said it looked like a fireplace.
I think we all got different ones though, because I got toothpaste.
Oh wow, good job, Lori.
Wow,
Flashlight and
Lori,
ray.
this is fun. This is
All right,
really
so just a few questions. If anyone wants to share or put in the chat, did the AI recognize your drawings?
wow, Ben, Andrew, you all did better than me.
Did anyone try to outwit the tool and draw badly intentionally? There's got to be someone on the call who tried that.
I'm too much of a rule follower.
How do we know AI didn't know the topic already?
We don't. But we'll talk a little bit more about this tool and how it might be relevant to understanding generative AI in just a second.
Yes, this was not just a fun exercise in the middle of the workshop to relieve tension.
Yeah, 7th inning
Although
stretch.
it did serve that purpose.
Yes. All right, well, feel free to add more comments to the chat, but let's move ahead to the next slide for the sake of time. And we'll talk about how how that tool, Google Quick Draw, might be relevant to understanding how AI and specifically LLMs work. So even though it's not a perfect comparison, we can see from the table that there are enough similarities that I think make the tool an apt comparison for thinking about generative AI and large language models in a high-level way. So on the one hand, they both use AI to process data in a certain way. On the one hand, Quick Draw is using drawings based on past doodles. And if you explore the site a little bit more, you can see past doodles that people have submitted. So there's that point of comparison. Of course, it works on the premise of pattern recognition, not true understanding. So just like Quick Draw will match strokes to common shapes, it doesn't quote see objects just like LLMs predict words based on probability, but they don't really understand meanings. As we'll talk about in just a second, both Quick Draw and generative AI and L also struggle with things like bias and data set limitations. So on the one hand, if there's unfamiliar drawing styles or missing categories, that will be problematic for Quick Draw. Just like generative AI and LLMs will reflect biases in their training data. We'll see an example in just a second. And this is especially relevant, the last point, to the ways that AI and generative AI and LLMs are increasingly advancing. We see this with recent advancements like those by DeepSeek, that through certain training methods, AIs can improve as more data is contributed to the process. In terms of LLMs, we see this with reinforcement learning from human feedback is one way that DeepSeek is able to achieve higher level of output, and I don't know if we want to call it a greater level of insight than previous tools. All right, next slide, please, Peg. At the same time, these different tools will struggle with things like cultural representation and bias. So most of these tools have a Western-centric focus and data set. If we look at the images in the background, those are images of hospitals, and you can see that they're all rather similar. But if someone from the Middle East were asked to draw a hospital, it would look rather different. Instead of putting a cross over a building, usually a hospital is represented by a crescent. Likewise, in some contexts, asking someone to draw an angel could be actually culturally offensive. So in the Arab and Muslim worlds, drawing angels or images of angels are generally discouraged and might be considered inappropriate. All right, I think we can move on.
All right. And so this is where I pick up and talk about a little bit about how it creates this output, but also what its own prime directive is, right? For those of you that are familiar with Star Trek, the prime directive is the one rule that it has to follow above all else. And in this case, it pretty much they're one and I went to the source, right? I asked the AIs that I have access to, what's your primary function? And actually the question I asked was, are AI systems designed to always give correct output? And Claude responded with, AI systems, like large language models, are designed to generate probable or plausible responses based on their training data and the patterns they've learned. Gemini came out with, AI systems are not designed to always give the correct output. While AI has made significant progress in recent years, it is not perfect and can sometimes produce incorrect or inaccurate results. And then contradictory chatbot, which Emily shared with me, was really fun because it gave me 3 answers. Because contradictory chatbot is one that, and I'll put the link in the chat for y'all, just because this is really a fun one. It basically gave me 3 answers, all of them essentially saying that they're designed to produce accurate outputs by being trained on carefully curated data sets and using sophisticated validation methods. That was number 1. Answer number 2 is AI systems are specifically designed to generate plausible but not necessarily accurate responses. Well, that's comforting. And answer number 3 was AI systems are designed to faithfully reproduce their training data exactly as provided, neither adding nor interpreting information. They act as sophisticated copying machines. I would argue with that last one just a little bit and say that it goes a little bit beyond that. But I think the primary message here is that it's basically it's garbage in, garbage out, right? And so we have to remember it's a machine and that lots of things can happen to machines. They can run hot, they can run cold. In this, I'm not making that up, right? Temperatures in a server room, and all of AI is run through servers, massive server farms, actually, right? And those servers run hot. They consume a tremendous amount of energy. So if it gets too hot in those rooms, then it can corrupt your data. Garbage in, garbage out. Like I said, the more junk that gets into the AI system, the more it can dilute the information that's in there, or the worse that it can corrupt and just give you, nonsense. Overfitting is if you have information, if you're too specialized in the information that's in there, the AI system doesn't have enough reference points to make any associations or to generate anything that's going to be useful because it's in too small of a box. The more complex the issues, the more queries you make, it's really easy. We wander down garden paths because that's how our brains think. Some of us worse than others. Thank you very much, ADHD. It's really easy for us to get lost. It's even easier for AIs to get lost because they don't have the contextual information that surrounds us. And then finally, of course, there's the lack of human context. We're constantly taking the world in with our senses. AI really doesn't have any senses, and that's an important thing to remember. So what kinds of things do actually go wrong? This is all great, but it's theoretical. On this slide, we actually got, and this is from the Sheng Zhu et al., AI hallucinations towards a comprehensive classification of distorted information in artificial intelligence generated content. They went through and they calculated errors and they came up with measurement unit errors, conceptual errors, all these different concepts that you see on the left-hand side here. And these different categories, these 8 different categories of what kinds of errors they are. But at the end of the day, these are the kinds of things we have to be looking at when we're looking at output, right? It's never safe enough just to put in a question, use the content. On the same vein, though, we also have indications that this is getting better. This is actually a really cool website that I found, and I'll put it into the chat, or maybe Emily, if you can do that, that would be great because I can't seem to copy and paste at the moment. But what this slide shows is it's a regularly updated hallucination rates for the top 25 large language models, right? So right now, Google Gemini 2.0 Flash only has a 0.7% hallucination rate. That's pretty darn good. If you look at some of the other earlier Googles, so Google Gemini 2.0 Flash experimental model, it had a 1.3. And if we go down a little bit further to Google Gemini 2.0 Flash Thinking -EXP, that was probably one of the very first ones, and that's all the way up to 1.8% hallucination. So the point is that they're getting better with time, right? Each time an AI redesigns itself, it gets a little bit better. But then on top of that, it's also showing us that it's showing us that AI models are getting better with time, but it's also showing us that they are policing themselves and working on this issue of hallucinations constantly. We can also evaluate. There are some automatic reference systems. And I just learned about these last night, so I did not put them into the deck because I didn't feel that it was appropriate given that I didn't know enough about them. But there are reference systems out there, one of which is called Lynx, and it basically Lynx is an AI that is used to verify references in other AIs. And there's a couple of them out there. There's a number of them out there, actually. I don't have it right in front of me, but I found about 6 or 8 different ones that are coming up and they're preparing for the world to use them. Again, it may turn out to be as useless as trying to detect, using Turnitin to detect AI usage. So I'm not putting a ton of weight on these yet, but it's something to keep an eye on. You can implement automated evaluation, right? And that's something we can talk about more as we get into the summer. Talking about evaluation frameworks that will identify these subtle problems. So if you look online, there are some evaluation frameworks that you can use. Again, we have more detail, but we had to pick and choose how deep we went in on this. So while I was doing my best to give you, initially I was going to go through all of this stuff in detail, but I figure it's just too much. Just know that there are specific evaluation frameworks out there that you can use, that we can share with you, so that you can determine whether or not your AI is producing what you need it to. One of the easiest things to do is just use common sense, right? If you're looking at your generated content and it's got weird references to things that don't have anything to do with what you're talking about, that's a good indication you need to look at it more closely. Definitely context coherence, things that are out of context, disconnected, don't have anything to do with what you're talking about. Internal consistency from one part of the conversation with your AI to the next. Remember that the longer your conversations go on, the further away you get from the original source information. So eventually that can break down. Now with Claude and Gemini, and I believe ChatGPT as well, you can use projects or folders or containment systems within the AI. And that does help because it consolidates all of the relevant information into one packet. And then you look at that packet and it will reference that as it's building your responses. But it's really important to know that if you're just randomly using an AI and you keep going on the same conversation thread, it will eventually degrade. I always fact check specific details. I still always spot check references, even though that has really stopped being an issue for me. The last time I checked references on the last thing I did, it had every single reference down. Like that, it used to be that references were just gobbledygook. But again, as time has gone on, AI has gotten better and it will continue to get better. That's the whole point of AI, right? It's going to keep getting better. And then obviously consulting human experts is the best thing you can do. If you're not sure, ask somebody that you know is sure to double check it for you. All of that leads to establishing clear protocols for what if you get something wrong. And this is where we move from literacy to competency, because if we're competent with a system, we know that it's going to screw up sometimes, and we're going to put a plan in place before it's an issue rather than have a student find the issue and point it out to us. So whatever we decide to go do as a university going forward, and this is where I think, Angela, you brought up an interesting point about the university sort of pushing back a little bit. This is where we have to decide as a university, what are our protocols going to be? How do we want to use these tools going forward? And what are we going to do if/when there are issues going forward? Any questions at this point? Any thoughts, concerns? If not, we're going to keep going. We're going to race through. I hope we're not going too fast, but Emily did some great work with some imagery and whatnot. So I'll pass it back to Emily and let her carry on.
Thanks, Peg. If you want to advance to the next slide, please.
Oh, I can do that.
Okay, so I'd like to continue briefly on the discussion of bias. And I think one of the easiest ways to see at a glance how bias may be part of AI's training processes, or at least part of its output, is through the lens of AI generated images. So what we're seeing here is an image, a series of images that Ethan Mollick, a leading voice in AI, created these images in December 2022 with the prompt, create an image of, or images of a nursing school leader. And so we can see that there is some gender bias and many other forms of biases in the images, and feel free to engage with us in the chat and let us know what you're thinking as well. If we go to the next slide, we can see the image that I generated yesterday using the same prompt. And I think what we can see here is that maybe the image quality has improved. It's kind of hard to say, but we still see the same biases replicated 2.5 years later in the AI generated images. So AI, the bias in terms of training models and their output still remains. So that is, I guess, unfortunately, one of the things that has not changed in terms of AI. I'd like to look at one more example, though, exploring bias. So if you go to the next slide, please, Peg. And here we'll look at some of the ways that AI might reinforce other biases. And what I'm doing here is building on the work. Okay, I don't know what's going on there, but I'm building on work from an article in the Lancet Global Health that's referenced above. And the request was to create an image of Black physicians treating impoverished white children. So I encourage you all just to take a minute and envision what you think this image might look like. So do that for about 10 seconds. And then Peg, if you could advance to the next slide, please. All right, so this is an image that was created using this prompt in November 2024. It's a problematic image in many ways, and we can see that the AI that was used for this task, and I'm afraid I did not create this image. It was given to me by a colleague from another institution. The AI did not effectively complete the task, I guess we could say. I tried this same prompt yesterday, and if you can go to the next slide, please, Peg, we can see the results that I got yesterday. And so using the exact same prompt, we see that the AI once again failed to complete the required request, at least as I input it. Now, if we could go to the next slide, what I found fascinating was the discussion that I had with AI after getting the image that you just saw. So
before we go to the next slide, though, does anybody have any immediate gut reaction to this? It won't take a lot of time, but does anybody want to jump out and say anything? Shocking, yes. I think horrifying was the word I was looking for. No, I don't think we do either. But I think if you think of it from an AI's perspective, they're just going based on what they've been given, right? So as far as they're concerned, they're representing properly.
All right, so yeah, this is the conversation that I had with the chatbot after it failed to render the desired output. So it said, here's an image, and I have put in a clarifying prompt, and it apologizes for misunderstanding. That's a good point, Lori, that I didn't try modifying the language. But what struck me about this encounter is that the particular portion in the lower part of the screen in which it says that it does not explicitly highlight socioeconomic indicators in a way that might communicate economic status. And so for me, I found this intriguing that I thought the AI was actually referencing socioeconomic factors as a periphrasis for race, and maybe as a way to try and obscure its bias. There's certainly a lot to unpack here, and if we have had more time, we could, I'm sure, talk about it at length. But unfortunately, time demands that we move on. But if you have thoughts, please add them to the chat. All right, so we're going to cover AI ethics in about 3 minutes, which obviously doesn't do it justice. This is really just a signal that, of course, part of AI literacy recognizes that there are myriad ethical considerations that are entailed in using or evaluating AI. And I broke it down into some high-level questions in terms of things like who owns the content, who completes the invisible labor behind the AI in terms of its working or labeling the data or all sorts of different parts of the training process. What is the cost of AI progress in terms of environmental impact? Can AI ever be neutral? And who gets access and who gets left out? These are all, of course, many of the questions that we want to talk about in terms of AI literacy. I think if there's interest that we will have a separate workshop this summer on AI ethics, and I welcome any comments or questions that you have about this. I know some of you had previously expressed interest in some of these topics, so I apologize that we don't really have time to talk about them at length right now. But what I'd like to do is to save the last 10 minutes to get to the competencies part of the workshop that was promised. So Peg, if you could move on to the next slide.
Sure. Do we want to go right to the competencies?
Go to the map slide, please.
Okay.
All right, so what I want to do to set up this conversation is to outline the idea of thinking about AI competencies as a roadmap. We've already talked at length about AI literacy as a foundation for thinking about AI, but Peg and I talked about this a lot, and we're going to suggest that AI competencies might offer a roadmap for thinking about how do we apply AI knowledge in practice. And so as such, this competency-based framework that we'll look at in just a second could be useful in guiding professional development in the sense that it will outline specific skills and knowledge required to critically engage with AI, to integrate it responsibly when you decide to do so, and to adapt to it in an evolving workplace. So now if we can go to the competency slide, please.
Okay, this is the big reveal, y'all. This
All
is
right.
the money slide.
Yes, so please take note. All right, so what we're suggesting is that we're at the point that it will be beneficial to, of course, have foundational AI literacy, but to become more effective in our specific disciplines or domains that we want to start thinking about AI competencies as a way to meet those needs. So what you see here is a list of 6 AI competencies from Russell et al. 2022, and you can use the QR code to access that article if you like. Just in terms of the like nitty-gritty of the article, the authors interviewed 15 experts in AI-based tools in healthcare settings and came up with a list of 6 high-level competencies as well as sub-competencies that are mentioned in the article. Right. So that's the background for this. I think what might be beneficial is just to take a minute so we can look at the slide, and then I'd like to reserve the rest of the workshop. So we have about 9 minutes, 8 or 9 minutes, just to have a conversation and hear from you all about if you think this is an effective AI competency framework, keeping in mind this is not mandated, it's a suggestion. And if not, or what's helpful about it, what's not helpful about it.
So can I ask a quick question then? Is this what you're suggesting we use? Well, it's something we could use for our students, right?
Correct, yes, so it's,
go ahead.
It's not mandated. I think it's one way of thinking about AI with a greater level of specificity. And the thing that I want to suggest is that if you replace the underlined portion, if you take healthcare applications and put in what is appropriate to your discipline or domain, that it is applicable across a range of disciplines.
No, I think this is a good thing, because I see that some students aren't using it appropriately, and I need help addressing them in a way that I'm not scolding them, but helping to inform them on the correct ways. But also I don't give them credit for their assignments when they are totally they're not using their own ideas. But anyway.
Well, and I think one of the things that we don't have a handle on yet is I think is that we all know students are using AI, right? Mm-hmm. We know that because 86% of students just flat out tell us they're using AI. I forget where I read that number, but I can look it up. So
that's a huge can of worms, Peg. I'm not arguing with you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
With 1 minute left, so I do want to thank everyone who joined And if you have to leave, just please note that I did put the feedback form in the chat. We really appreciate any feedback you have, or if you would like to email me or Peg directly with feedback, we of course welcome that. I can stay after a few minutes, so I would love to hear more thoughts about AI competencies and if you think this is something relevant or if it's just not attainable right now, given our resources and infrastructure. That's helpful to know too.